You got to win before you bring the country together. Are they that confident, Julie Pace, or is that just a, shall we say, a public face?
They're pretty confident. I spent about 10 days out with Clinton through last week, and they certainly felt like the incident with the FBI stalled her momentum, but they do feel like they maintained several clear paths to 270 electoral college votes. And you have seen Hillary Clinton in the last couple of days looking a bit beyond the election, talking about how she does want to be a president for everybody. They know they have a lot of work to do in Pennsylvania and Michigan tomorrow to make sure that their supporters show up, but there's a definite sense of confidence that she is already starting to turn a slight bit of her attention to what happens after this election.
But that's why it was so interesting that this debate was so sharply negative toward the end. I mean, that is a huge understatement by Hillary Clinton. If she does indeed win the presidency, that she's going to have a little bit of work to do to bring the country together. I mean, the nation is so fractured right now. You would have many Trump supporters who will feel, potentially disenfranchised if he were to lose tomorrow night. And her message in the closing days has been one of unity in some respects, but also still some hard hits on Trump, and those aren't going to feel good to Trump supporters.
No, they are not. But as you get into this final day, though, she is in some blue states. Two stops in Pennsylvania. Let's put up the states she's going to. Again, just let's look at them again. As we look at the Clinton map here, 51 electoral votes in her states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and North Carolina. Two stops in Pennsylvania, one on each side. Pittsburgh to the west, Philadelphia to the east. But if you're the Democratic candidate, North Carolina makes perfect sense. That's a traditional swing state. If you're the Democratic candidate on the final day, is that confidence? And what the Clinton campaign says is no early voting in those states. So you tend to those states last because you don't do early voting. But is the public line the truth?
Well, it's also fear that if the way that Donald Trump wins, he has to flip one of those blue states. He has to win in North Carolina. He has to win Florida. He has to do reasonably well in the West, maybe pull off a win in Colorado or Nevada. This is a defensive strategy going in. This is not what the Clinton campaign wanted 2 weeks ago. They wanted to be barnstorming in Arizona, maybe even in Georgia, maybe have just a resounding win where she would come in with a strong mandate where she could say, this is what I want to do with the country. That has obviously, as Julie said, her momentum is stalled because of the FBI investigation, and they've had to run this scorched earth campaign to limp across the finish line. Now, the thing is, though, there are a lot of paths for her to win. This could be a very huge electoral landslide. At the end of the day, she could still get over 300 electoral votes, or she could barely get enough, barely over 270, or Donald Trump could keep her under if he runs the table and wins those states we pointed out.
And Donald Trump has to be perfect.
Inside
essentially perfect.
As he so often is. That's the problem for him, is that so much has to fall his way. And she is in those blue wall states, which is good news for him because they feel threatened in a Michigan and a Pennsylvania, which is a perfect place where his exact appeal overlaps with something where he can threaten Democrats and get a lot of
older, wider economic populism,
Rust Belt
trade,
area.
Rust Belt.
And so it's good news for him that they're there, but it's bad news for him that he's in how many states? Because he has to have so many fall his way. And he is plenty energetic on the trail and will be in all those states and will brag about being in all those states, but it's not necessarily great news for him that he needs to be in that many.
Right, and some people are actually questioning if he's done too many states. Why? You go to, it seems kind of scattershot. You stopped in New Mexico a few days ago. You went to Minnesota. Should he have gotten on a bus and gone across Pennsylvania, a bus and gone across Michigan? I know Donald Trump's not a bus guy. But let's look at the states. We showed you the Clinton states. Let's look at the Donald Trump states today. Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and Michigan. They add up to 84 there. And if you look at that, he actually, does he have to win them all? Maybe not. But if he doesn't win North Carolina, he needs both Michigan and Pennsylvania. And a lot of the Clinton people think, and we'll get to this as we go through the hour, that early voting has helped them there. If he doesn't win Florida, I'm sorry, I have a really hard time. Because of the demographics. It's the math. You take 29 away, and you're the underdog. It's really hard to get there. But B, it's the demographics. If you're losing a state like Florida, it's hard to say you're going to win, say, even North Carolina, just because the different constituencies. That's just how it goes.
Exactly. These elections, even though they are state by state, don't actually happen in a vacuum. So if you're seeing a trend in a state like Florida, you can expect that you're going to see that trend play up through a state like North Carolina. The thing that's been so interesting about Donald Trump's strategy over these closing days is, and this shouldn't be a huge surprise, he's chasing these one-off polls that maybe show that in a state like Minnesota, he's doing better. You don't win a state, you don't flip a state in the final days with a rally. You flip a state with a lot of effort on the ground, a lot of consistent work to register new voters, to turn your voters out. One rally in the final couple of days is not going to be enough for him.
Well, he had one rally in this penultimate day, as we will call it, in Florida, Sarasota, Florida. Listen to Donald Trump here. The closing arguments report, and this message aimed at Florida, but he also knows the country's watching.
In one day, we are going to win the great state of Florida, and we are going to take back the White House. We're going to take it back. Florida's my second home, a state I love so much. And by the way, Hillary, once this is over, she'll never come back to Florida. She's got nothing to do with Florida.
She's got nothing to do with Florida. Look, the 29 are critical here. One of the interesting things yesterday, in just talking about and this morning, calling and emailing with people in the states, one of the reasons the Clinton people feel more confident this morning is not only what they are hearing from their people on the ground, but what they're seeing in the reporting from Republicans on the ground. And there's a lot, if you look at Florida, again, we'll get into this more granular as we move through the hour, but over the weekend, a few days ago, we were talking about African-American turnout in the early voting being down. Democrats say they caught up, and they got there and they actually exceeded the 2012 turnout among African-Americans. The biggest story of this election most likely will be the Latino vote, and not just in Florida, but they say they're off the charts in terms of the Latino vote voting early in Florida. Organization does that, Mary Catherine, and it is an area where I think the post-mortems of this election are going to say the Clinton campaign had by far a superior organization.
Yeah, I think Republicans have been playing catch-up on this front for a long time, and I think Trump stalled it out. The Trump campaign exists on id, and if that can pull him across the line, it will be a really strange election. And this is a tepid compliment, but she's a box checker, right? She will make sure that every single thing they can do to get out her people will be done. The Trump campaign does not have that same mindset, and sometimes doesn't have half the data they have because they haven't done the work that you need to do.
And they were really worried about the millennial vote, particularly among Latino and young African-American voters in Florida, because that is what really could matter tomorrow night. And I think that, throughout this whole race, so often the polls don't reflect the ground game at all. And you have to come back to the fact that, the RNC was really pulling a lot of the weight for Donald Trump in terms of ground game, identifying voters, all of that. He's been pretty savvy in terms of his social media operation. But beyond that, it really may be about ground game tomorrow night.